Rolling.
My name's Darren Chalwood. I'm a Wiradjuri artist and I'm a Cultural Heritage Officer at the Royal Botanic Gardens. You know, I've been an artist for my entire life. I've only really focused on it in the last sort of like 10 years of my life. I went through some hard times. I had an epiphany and I turned my life around and started to focus on cultural education, which is really badly in need in this country. Today I'm making something that's very important. I'm making a language map of Australia. This map is the first time that an Indigenous person has, as a whole, put down the language groups of Australia. Before, individual mobs marked out their own boundaries on country, whereas this is the first time an Indigenous person has culminated it. My map that I'm going to produce, instead of having those lines as very rigid boundaries, I'm going to use them more as points of communication, links to other groups. And I'm going to define these lines as song lines or trade routes, if you will. When I first started to think about how I was going to approach this map, how I was going to do it, something that I do like to do in my work is I do like to use lots of colour. I like to use colours that contrast each other, that really, they really pop out at you. I decided to go for the blue, water. The yellow for the map because it just stands out nicely. To get a map that size down onto a piece of canvas that big is challenging, and the best way that I've found to get around that challenge was to use a projector, where I'm projecting different images, like really old maps, new maps, to get an idea and a feel of a more organic grouping of these maps. I'm sourcing a lot of the reference stuff to this map comes from the native title representations, okay? Like where you look at where people actually have native title in Australia, where they've gained it and where it's been extinguished. And just touching on native title as well, language is something that's very much tied up to that. You won't find land councils, Aboriginal people who have been granted their land claim to them who haven't got still a robust sort of language going on in their community. Language maps are very important for the greater Australia, looking onto them. Aboriginal culture is very exclusive and it's very individual. When you see the lines, which are a very Western concept of how we have to measure everything, because ultimately Aboriginal culture isn't like that. It's not something that Aboriginal people really want or need maps like this. It's a way of the rest of society trying to make sense of something that really doesn't need to be made sense of. It's important to map languages and it's important to have an idea. It is very important to have an understanding of where language is flourishing in Australia and where language isn't flourishing, because it answers other questions. The individual names that you see on these different language maps naming the language have a whole set of values and cultural aspects and complex relationships with the country that the individual people live on. Communities that have healthy language and they've got a healthier culture taking place, are more successful communities. Language, it's a verb, it's like culture, it needs to be practiced. If it's not practiced, it's lost. It gives us a better understanding of how to approach and how to save languages that might be lost. Language is something that was not handed down to me as it should have been, like in my family. There are words that I do know in Wiradjuri language, and I'm going to bring a word up now that I'm going to try and use and carry through this project, and that's Yindi Yamara. Okay, Yindi Yamara. Yindi Yamara is a word that means a couple of different things in Wiradjuri. It means respect, it means gently, it means to take care. Okay, so it's a word that I'm going to keep pulling out as this project goes along. Having the hide to represent other people's countries in a map like this is something that I need to approach very respectfully. And Yindi Yamara, I will continue to approach this very gently and very respectfully in its journey, coming across the different people that I'm going to be talking to. For me, I like to think of myself as just a vessel for this work. I'm just channeling something that really needs to be done. It really feels to me like this is a legacy for me. Putting something down like this is such an honour, and I need to do it gently, I need to do it respectfully. When things like this happen to me, it's my ancestors shining down on me, like it really is.